We're here at Breakforth, and I've got my favorite worship leader, Mr. Dan Macaulay. You're not only a Covenant Award nominee now, you're officially a winner. And over the last few years, you've kind of worked with some award-winning producers. You've had the privilege of working with Nathan Knuckles.
Thanks to you, actually.
That was a lot of fun. But then you worked with Michael W. Smith and Brian Lennox. That had to be very, very cool. So that was, you know, you've had some wonderful ups in this industry. But one of the things that I first heard about you was the song "Amazing." Before we even met, I knew this song. And I remember when we finally went out for dinner, and I was like, "You wrote that song," and then you became my favorite worship leader of all time.
Yeah,
so
sealed the deal.
But you also have a wonderful.
That was like 20 years ago.
Yeah, well, not quite, not quite, but it feels like that at times.
No, I mean that I wrote it.
Oh, that you wrote it.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
So
that song's lived.
Yeah.
What do you think made that song so popular?
I think it was, most people write to me about, I guess, the vulnerability of it. Lines like, "Who am I that you should hear my song?"
Right.
Which is actually kind of right out of the Psalms. But probably most of all is the line, you know everything and you still love me. That kind of weight of guilt that we all kind of tend to carry a little bit, and the shame that is actually lifted off us from the cross, but there's still some aspect of it that, like, God, you know, like, my thoughts.
You know, like, everything.
Yeah, and you still, like, want to know me or like me at all. That's probably the line, I think, that, and there have been actually a lot of songs written probably since then, in 96, I think it was, or something, that have said similar things. I'm not aware of too many that said it before that, and so maybe it was a novel idea then. I don't know.
But that's a theme that runs through a lot of your songs.
Yes, it is.
So originally you write "Amazing," and you've always been writing songs, but then it progressed. But every album you come out with, every song that you come out with, you just played me a brand new one. And what is the title? "Morning by Morning." You just sent it to me last night, and I listened to it. That's going to be a new single. But again, it's the vulnerability. I don't know many in the worship side of things. And I may be a little biased because not only do we know each other, but I have become incredibly a big fan of your music. But the vulnerability in which you write with, I don't think it's something that we see too often. And I think that is infectious. Not only because people can go, I can relate to that, you know?
I think there's an honesty that is desired and needed, and David said in the Psalms, "You desire honesty from my heart." I think that's what kind of made David a man after God's own heart, despite all his mistakes, is that he kept bringing it back to God and saying, "Oh, create in me a clean heart, oh God, and renew a right spirit within me," and just really gut honest kind of stuff. And so I gravitate towards that because that's the inner conversation every day.
It feels like we're reading your mail, and because of that, you kind of read a lot of our mail. I think that kind of vulnerability is what people can understand, which brings me back to kind of the beginning for you. When we first met, we talked about this, and I started to understand your story a little bit. You had been a worship pastor in Connecticut. You left there for what seemed like greener pastures in Nashville. I think God was sending you there, and that ended kind of abruptly and strangely. We won't get into those details right now. But then you moved back, and you kind of felt lost, and then you move into doing full-time music, and you're going after it, and then you move again. You go down to Connecticut again, and now you're here you're living in Buffalo, right near Buffalo.
Right.
You're traveling and touring across Canada, a little bit in the States still, but it was like your career and your life with you and Danielle was going all over the map. And in the midst of all of that turmoil, you wrote some of my favorite worship songs ever.
Thank you.
How do you find the connection with God in the midst of all the frustration and struggle?
I think he's there through all of it, and in some ways, he's that much closer in the struggle. Because it was funny, actually. On the flight here, I was working on a sermon because I preach sometimes too, and I was working on a sermon. I was going back through some of my own like journals, and seeing, actually, it just came to me right now. I'm just thinking, as you're detailing all these things, I was going back and I was reading my devotionals and my journaling and the verses I was writing down and collecting through all those things that you just said. And I found, I was struck before that about how, when in each and every one of those, I'm a big believer in seasons in life. You're talking about seasons. We all go through them. And through those seasons that were darker, that were harder, I was filling that journal. I was writing out scriptures. I was, praying. I was, fasting. I was doing all those things. It's all documented there. And then I can also see in there times when things got a little bit better and easier, and that the journal frequency, writing in there, the frequency was a little bit less, to my discredit. But I was observing that about myself, and so I think when you're in those struggles, you're drawn to him that much more, because you realize you can't. I thought I could do this on my own. I actually can't, and it's ever that much more clear. And so some of those songs come out of the darker times. Some of the I can think of lots of different worship songs that were written out of that writer's really dark period of time, like "It Is Well With My Soul." The story behind that, amazing.
Well, look at the Psalms.
Yeah,
I mean, David didn't write when he was on a mountaintop.
No.
Very rarely would he say, "Wow, is my life great?" It's usually, "I'm in the pit. Oh God, where are you? Help me."
Sure. There's both there, but there's a whole lot of pit in there.
There's a whole lot of pit.
And a lot of times in church, we don't like to talk about the pit.
No.
We want to be happy all the time and talk about all the happy stuff, but the pit's a real part of life. And the very same good shepherd who leads us beside the still waters and in green pastures leads us through the valley of the shadow of death sometimes.
The one thing that you do, you tour a lot. Back in the day, I used to do the same, and I know what it's like when you're touring by yourself. But lately, you've been doing something a little bit different. You are now touring with a humorist, a very, very crazy individual, and you're doing a lot of stuff with Leland Clausen, and you're adding this humor. How has that affected how you lead worship? Or has it? Have you noticed, does that create a different environment, or what are your thoughts?
It's something I never ever saw myself doing, and I really enjoy doing. I still lead worship and speak and teach workshops and do all that, but this is kind of like another hat that I wear. And touring with Leland, I think I may have erred before in the past on being overly serious, maybe even at times, whereas this is kind of, I don't know, I've learned from watching Leland. I watch him every night, and so I've learned the way he interacts with the crowd, and so I think I've picked up a few things that, it serves you well to, know those kinds of things. So, it's been fun. It's another hat, and so we do things that are kind of outreach oriented. So and every time, almost every night that we do them, a pastor will say, see that person over there sitting beside her. She comes all the time, but this is his first time ever coming.
Great.
Or this family, my neighbors are coming to check out church for the first time, and so they'll come to an event like that. That's fun, and if it's a couples night out, I'm singing a medley of love songs, and if it's one that's not specifically for couples, it might be some other fun songs in the mix, and then we'll throw in something like Amazing in the mix of things. By the way, this is what true love is, that Jesus died for us in spite of us.
Well, you are a man of many talents. You write great songs, you're a great singer, but you connect with people and you're vulnerable, and I think that's wonderful. And you also teach. A lot, and not only just on worship, but you preach, and you bring all of this vulnerability to a community that so desperately needs to have that connection with people and with the Creator. I think you're brilliant at that, so I'm so glad that you were here.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing this, buddy.
Yeah, my pleasure.
We've been listening to Dan Macaulay. If you want to get a hold of his music, go to danmacaulay.com. Check him out on iTunes. He's all over the internet. You will not be sorry that you got a hold of his incredible music. Please stay with us.